If you are interested in buying a business and you think that it's all rainbows and unicorns and everything is always wonderful, well, it isn't. This video is a behind the scenes conversation with my podcast editor all about the reality of buying a business and how frustrating it can really be. Like this video, subscribe to the channel and tap the notifications bell so that YouTube can send you a notification the next time I release a brand new video. If you want to buy a business without risking any of your own cash, then click the information button up here at the top of the video and you can take my free online training course. So click the button, take the course, and let's get started.
Jonathan, as you're actually going through an acquisition, you must uncover or reveal all sorts of quirky facets and behaviours and so on. What are some of the more interesting ones you've come across?
Well, there's several situations that I'm always baffled by how they pan out. So so often you've got someone who's selling a business, sometimes for a considerable amount of money, and they're just never available.
Okay.
Now, in my experience, when I've sold companies, I'm on it. That's all I think about all day long. I get that email, I respond to it. You want information, you've got it. You want a meeting tomorrow, I'm there. And sometimes people just make it so difficult. We've got one at the moment where the owner wants £2 million and he's adamantly wants this £2 million, but he will not come to a meeting to discuss his business. He wants to know, what questions am I going to ask him about his business? Well, I'm going to ask you about the business that you're selling. I want you to tell me what you're selling. And it is remarkable how difficult he's being about this meeting, where, in my head I'm saying, there are 2 million reasons for you to come and talk to me, but he will not budge on this. So it's not going anywhere. It's crazy. It really is absolutely crazy. So we had one seller in one of the earlier acquisitions who became unavailable every Tuesday and Wednesday. And every Tuesday and Wednesday, he just was not available to talk to us. He wasn't receiving WhatsApp messages. He was just unavailable. And it got to the point where I had to say to him, so Martin, what is it that you're doing on Tuesdays and Wednesdays? Because we thought he was an Uber driver. We're trying to work out what he was doing.
Some other business that,
Of course he wasn't an Uber driver. He was a consultant in a pork pie factory.
A pork pie factory.
Of course he was. And owned a nursery. So it was quite interesting because actually his daughter bought my book on how to buy a business. And then they started using my tactics back at me, which was a little bit annoying because I actually recognised what they were doing. Did it work? To a certain extent, it might have done. But we've had so many situations where the owners have been hard to get hold of. I mean, I've got one at the moment where the wife, who seems to have all the financial information at her fingertips, is only available on Fridays. So when you're trying to do a deal in a reasonably short period of time and they're only available to talk about it one day a week, and quite often it's the most inconvenient day of the week, you think, well, why not make yourself more available? Take some holiday, take some time off.
Absolutely. Do you think that's unique to owners of nurseries, or do you think actually that kind of behaviour, if you like, would happen in...
Well, you've got to remember that there are some sectors where the focus is not on running a business. The focus is on providing a service.
Yes.
And the business part is kind of pushed to one side. And as a result of that, you don't get a particularly business-like response to requests for information.
Yeah, okay.
So we use an external due diligence firm, and with one company that they were doing due diligence on our behalf, they actually refused to answer any more questions because they had become so frustrated with the process, and they actually said, we're not going to answer your questions anymore. And it's like, well, you want to sell your business, we're trying to understand your business. The signal that it sends to us, if you don't want tell us anything more about it, is that there is something you don't want us to know. And they go, no, that's not us, that's not the case at all. Yes, but you can see why that's the assumption that we have made, because you aren't engaging with our due diligence firm. And I think that selling a business is very stressful for many people. In fact, to be fair, I think it's stressful for just about everyone.
Right.
You know, I've been very stressed when I've been on sell side. And as a result, you become quite short-tempered, and everything becomes very frustrating. However, when you're buying, one of the key attributes of a good business buyer is patience, where even though the seller wants to do it by Christmas, it doesn't make any difference to you whether it's January, February, March. And when you feel an impatience creeping in, that's when you start making poor decisions and relenting on points that you would not have given in on otherwise.
Yeah. And presumably, again, that from a buyer's point of view is yet another reason why what you refer to as deal flow is important, that you have you've got to be patient. Therefore, in order to keep acquisitions flowing, you have to have many.
So there's another hidden benefit of deal flow, you see, because if you've got 6, for example, on the go at any one time, you're not going to be all over them at the same time on Monday morning. So deal number 6, you might not really get round to Tuesday afternoon, just because that's the sequence that you're looking at those particular deals. Now, to the seller of deal 6, they've been anxious since Monday morning. They haven't heard from you.
They crafted the email on Friday afternoon.
So in actual fact, they find it quite unsettling, which isn't always a bad thing when you're in this scenario. But you just, there's nothing untoward. It's just that you haven't got around to deal number 6 until Tuesday afternoon. So in actual fact, I think there's another small hidden benefit to that.
I can see that. And do you always make it clear to the people that you are potentially acquiring that you do have several on the go?
Always, absolutely, and it's true.
Oh yes, I'm not suggesting you.
But it's. I think people need to know that you have options.
Yeah.
And the way they interpret that is there's only a certain amount of money to be spent, and therefore you're either going to spend it with them or spend it with someone else.
Yeah.
Which again has a ring of truth to it, actually.
Yeah.
But looking back at the early nursery acquisitions, there have been so many times where I've sat there with my head in my hand saying, I don't believe it. With the distressed ones, it is unbelievable how much debt someone would take on for a business that never has a chance of repaying that debt.
Yes.
And they personally guarantee it. And it's just absolutely dreadful. And there have been times where we sat here in the office and we felt so awful for these owners that have got themselves in such a pickle, and this is their way out.
Because in many cases, and it's not just exclusive to day nurseries, these are potentially people for whom this is their life, this is their baby, this is their creation. They treat their business with as much deference and protection as they would their house or their family.
So they put money into it.
Yeah.
And that isn't the right way, because money should be flowing out of a business after a certain period of time. But they're shoring it up with more cash, and then are incredibly surprised when someone says, well, look, this business probably doesn't have the value that you think it has. So every time I talk to an owner who has had a conversation with a broker, I know that their sense of value is just extreme.
Unrealistic at the very least.
It's unrealistic because they have got a figure in their head that the salesperson, they always say, well, it's a professional value. No, the salesperson on the end of the phone has said, oh my goodness, there's a queue of people looking for a business just like yours. So first of all, they believe that because it's quite a flattering thing to believe. And secondly, they believe their business is worth a lot, which is also quite flattering. they completely forget the numbers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's something that I encounter pretty much daily.
I'm interrupting your video with a very important message. If you are watching a video like this, it's probably because you're serious about buying a business. But watching free videos on YouTube will only take you so far. You need to take the next step. And the next step is a link that's somewhere on the screen up at the top, which takes you through to our free video training. There's no cost whatsoever. You watch the free video training and that will give you some of the essential basics that you need. Now, if you get value from that, then I would invite you to be part of my next Fast Track program. Now, the Fast Track program has been running for a couple of years now. We've had nearly 3,000 people around the world on the Fast Track program, and it's a Zoom program that you can attend from anywhere. It's broadcast from my living room to your living room, where I will teach you what you need to know to go and buy your first business. And there's a Q&A section at the end of each of the training sessions, so you can ask me all of your questions. Now, if you get great value from that and you're really serious about buying a business, then there's my mastermind program, a 12-month program where we hold your hand through the business buying process so that you can buy your first company. And when you have, I'll invite you into our inner circle, which is exclusively for people who've bought their first business. So that's what we've got lined up for you. It's up to you whether you take the next step. Anyway, back to the video.
So repositioning someone's sense of value around the business that they're selling is very important. Now, if a broker told them it was worth a fortune 3 years ago and it still hasn't sold,
Right.
then their value resets. So one of our early nursery acquisitions have been with a broker for 6 years.
So they've been trying to sell for 6 years.
Correct. Now, part of the fault, to be fair, was on the part of the owner who hadn't terminated the agreement, and it had just rolled.
Right, yes.
And I don't know the exact number, but I believe they had to pay the broker £12,000 upon the sale of the business, even though the broker had not been involved and it hadn't been for 6 years.
Wow.
Crazy, isn't it?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. You talked earlier about some of the behaviours of people selling you their business. You must also have encountered a number of somewhat futile attempts to disguise things from you, be it business performance, be it debt, be it... Are there lessons you've learned about what to look for, or how to look for certain ways that they may have dressed up?
You don't believe anything that you're told. I mean, that's a pretty good starting point. You don't believe anything until you've got evidence. Because someone selling their business is doing exactly that. They are selling their business, and they are going to accentuate the positive and they're going to ignore the negative. And I've never met a business owner who hasn't told me what an incredible opportunity this is. The potential is huge. With nurseries, they always say there's a housing estate being built around the corner. Everyone's got a housing estate being built around the corner. And if there is a bit of a negative, the numbers haven't been so strong recently, it's always because we've got a lot of children who have left for school. The birth rate has dropped in the area. If you go and visit the nursery and it seems a bit empty, we've got a lot of illness at the moment. Yeah. So there's always a reason for that, which is why due diligence then unpicks those assertions and looks at a historic trend rather than just the day that you viewed.
Right.
Because what they're thinking is, if we tell Jonathan or Jonathan's colleague that the birth rate's been down, a lot of children left for school, a lot of illness, and you've come on a quiet day, then he might believe that because he's not going to come back tomorrow and the next day and the next day and the next day. But due diligence cuts through all of that and just looks at the numbers and allows us to ascertain whether this is a trend, whether it is a blip, or whether what the owner is saying is actually true or not.
Yeah. So rather than put it rather negatively, trust nothing, perhaps the lesson is check everything.
Check everything. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Trust nothing. Check everything.
Yeah. Interesting.
And to be fair, anyone who thinks they can sell a business and that isn't the case is probably deluding themselves. It's like selling a house and hoping that no one's going to notice that crack that runs from the top of the building to the bottom, and sort of standing in front of it, hoping that you can divert attention away from it. It just doesn't wash.
Or that somehow it won't come out that there's a new municipal waste centre with planning permission to build.
Hence, the job of your conveyancing solicitor to run those searches and your surveyor to make sure that you're protected is exactly the same when buying a business. Unfortunately, what often happens in this sector, I feel, in the nursery sector, is that people get a figure in their head as to what their business is worth, and that figure is aligned to their description of the business to you, the buyer.
Right, yes.
And when the description changes, they don't feel that the price should change because it's still a great business.
Yeah.
So there's still a not facing up to facts.
Yeah.
But that's just the way it is.
And presumably, particularly if they've been running the nursery for 10 or 15 years and they've set it up themselves, part of their sense of the value of the business must come from a sort of personal feeling of,
yes,
I've put 10 or 15 years of my life into this business.
They equate all the hard work and all the sleepless nights and all the months they didn't get paid because they paid everyone else first and there wasn't any money left over at the end of the month. And they feel they now should be rewarded for that effort.
Sure.
But you're not rewarded for the effort, you're rewarded for the business that you're selling. Yeah. So if all that effort, unfortunately, was in vain, unfortunately, the business value will reflect the fact that the business is not performing at the level that it did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I've got one happening at the moment where there's a property, and the property value, for the sake of round figures, they told me the value was property was 900,000. We got in a RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, valuer, because that's what we always do with property, who came back at 815. So there's a variance of £85,000. So, a 10% variance in the price, or in the value, I should say. Mm-hmm. So they want a certain price, but the value sits below the price. So their argument is that because of Brexit and all these different things, house prices are at their lowest. Well, actually, that's not true. House prices were at their lowest 8 or 9 years ago, but that's brushed over. So why should they sell at a price that's at the lowest in the market, in that it will creep up over time? Well, because you're selling now.
Yes.
If you want to get the price it will be in 5 years, sell it in 5 years. You can't sell it today at the price you feel it will be in 5 years. It just doesn't work like that. Yeah. Yeah. It's like going into a restaurant and them bringing you the bill, and the bill is higher than the prices in the menu. You say, oh yes, that's because over the next few years the prices are going to go up, so we're going to charge you the price in 5 years. No, it doesn't work like that. So they don't want to let go of their property asset at a low price. So I've said, go and get your own RICS valuation. It won't come in to the pound exactly the same. Of course it won't. But let's see what it does come in at, and then we can talk. And there's a reluctance on their part to pay out £1,200 for a RICS valuation, even though there's £2.4 million at stake.
Right.
So again, I want £2.4 million for the business and the property, but that £1,200, not sure if I really want to do that. So when buying a business, it's not just the mechanics, it's all of these people issues that means that everything takes longer than you intended, it's harder work than you intended, and you've got to be good with people to be able to manage these expectations and these misunderstandings and put your arm around their shoulder and say, it's going to be okay. Let's just get this deal done.
And managing expectations, from what you're saying, has worked to get deals done more often than not. But have you ever been in a situation where, despite all your efforts, the seller's personal view of what their business is worth and yours are just so far
all the
apart?
time.
Right.
All the time.
And do you just walk away?
Absolutely.
No, you very quickly ascertain we're not gonna ever agree something here.
Absolutely. But it's not a big deal. When you go and buy a property, you don't expect to look at one property and buy it.
Sorry for interrupting your video, but I wanted to introduce you to a great lawyer in the UK who can get your deals done for you. He's worked for 50 of my mastermind clients in the last few months alone. His name is John Andrews, and I've got his details right here in my little black book of contacts. You can phone him on 0345 241 2494, or you can email him on johnandrews.deallawyer@jmw.co.uk. If you want someone who can get a deal done, he is your guy. So let's get back to the video.
You look at lots of properties, you have lots of disappointments, and you end up with one victory. But that's all you need, one property to live in.
Yeah.
And it's the same with businesses. If you only need one business to transform the size of your existing company, then it's worth sitting down with 20 or 30 people because that deal is in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So my day-to-day role in this company is looking at deals, evaluating them, and deciding whether it's something worth pursuing or not. And usually it's not.
And that's really interesting. Has your criteria for doing that changed as a result of the first 6 acquisitions?
Yes, it has, because it starts to tighten. So the more you look at, the more you realise there are some you just don't want. And some
that you might have considered 6 months
earlier.
ago. Right, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the last 6 months, we've withdrawn from 3,
Right.
of which all 3 we were at heads of terms with.
Oh, really? You got to
Yeah, we were at heads of terms. We withdrew from 3 of them. The first was...
Yeah, I was going to say, tease me. Give me some.
so the first was better deals came along and the location just wasn't going to work. It was too far away from anything else.
Mm-hmm.
So better deals came along. We said, no, thank you. Second was the owner introduced very late in the process his desire for personal guarantees, which we were not prepared to do because it would require a personal guarantee from all of the directors, and my colleagues weren't up for that. And as a matter of policy, we wouldn't do it anyway. So that fell by the wayside. And then the third one we withdrew from, we signed heads of terms, and then they started to try and reposition the deal, change the terms after speaking to their solicitor, who put into their heads the idea that they should have a better or a different deal. Well, no, the deal was absolutely fine. The deal that we signed and shook on was absolutely fine, and we could do this all day long. You know, I could say, well, actually, I think they should, because they're changing everything in their favour.
Right.
Where if I went and changed everything in my favour, I'd be a terrible human being.
Absolutely.
Because they said, Jonathan, you're reneging on the deal. Well, no, you're reneging on the deal. So we just said no.
Yeah.
Fine.
But again,
have it your way, which is we're not doing it.
But again, at the beginning of the challenge, you might have been more accommodating.
Yeah,
because you wanted to get.
I've got a really big target to hit, so I don't want to lose those deals. But I'm not going to do bad deals for the sake of it. Right. So when people say, why do you do or how do you do good deals, it's because I just don't do bad ones.
Yeah.
I just avoid the bad ones.
Yeah.
Now, when you're doing something at scale, there's going to be a couple that creep in because all the due diligence in the world sometimes doesn't show up in every facet of the business, or there's something that's been very well hidden. But when you've got something at scale and you've got multiple companies, you can lose one or two and it doesn't really make any difference.
Yeah.
If you structure it in the way that I show people to structure it, you're not going to lose out.
Yeah. And has your criteria for even shortlisting the ones to make contact with in the first place changed during the first phase?
Yeah, so we have a very elegant system where my colleague Anna speaks to everyone initially. If she feels that it passes our basic criteria check, then I speak to them. Today I've got 2 that I'm speaking to this afternoon.
But has that basic criteria check changed in the 6 months since you started?
Yes, it's probably become more stringent.
Okay.
Because don't forget, at the beginning, you want to leave the funnel wide open. You don't want to close too many doors. You don't want to say no to too many people until you realise that you can get deal flow regardless of the fact that you're saying no to lots of people. I think you're less picky at the start and just become more selective as time goes on.
Interesting.